I try to pass out my business card. If there's anybody here that doesn't have my business card, I have a whole bunch of them. I'd be glad to give you my business card. I have them up here. My business card is my first alternate method of buying real estate. When I wrote the book, I sourced out where I got the deals. I've done personally for my own inventory 800 deals. In the book, when I was writing the book, I put down what the source of the property was, how I came about the property, how I funded the property, what I paid for, what I sold it for, what I rented it for, what I did in renovations. On every one of the properties that are listed in the book, and there's 274 properties listed in the book, and they were all properties that I personally bought. But when I was sourcing for the book, I came up with that only 25% of the properties that I bought came out of the multi-list. So that means that 75% didn't come out of the multi-list, they came from other sources. And the one source that I was wanting to mention first about the business card is if you don't already have a business card, you should get a business card. Everybody in this room should have a business card. And you should pass out that business card everywhere you go. A meeting like this, you should be giving your business card to everybody that you meet. You don't know when a time will come that there might be a relationship built between you and somebody else in this room to buy a property, sell a property, or finance a property. Because there's people in this room that buy properties, sell properties, and finance properties. They're all in this room. You don't have to go looking for them. My card, for the people that I gave my card, is high quality stock. It's about the thickness of a playing card, and it's printed on both sides. If you have a business card and the back of your business card is blank, you're wasting 50% of your business card. I've seen people's business card that doesn't have their name on it or doesn't have any contact information on it, and I've seen people's business cards doesn't say what they do. You have to say what you do. You have to have all your contact information on your card. You have to have your email address, your mailing address, your phone number, your cell phone number, your fax number, whatever. All that information needs to be on your card. So, a couple months from now or a year from now, somebody in this room wants to contact you. Say, oh, I remember that person I met at Jim Ingersoll's boot camp. I think I have something that we can probably do a deal together. You need to be able to contact that person. So I encourage all of you to pass out your business cards to everybody, and if you don't have business cards, that you get business cards. That's the first alternative method. These are some of the alternative methods that I've used to acquire real estate. I've bought property from the highway department. I bought delinquent tax sale properties. I bought HUD properties. I bought VA foreclosures. I bought life estates, word of mouth, and probate properties. Word of mouth is another way of meeting people. If I buy a property, I try to introduce myself to the neighbors of the property that I just bought. And I'll say to them, you have a nice house here. This is a nice neighborhood. Here's my card. Here's my contact information. If there's any ever problem with anything that's going on at my property, feel free to contact me. No, I'm not in hiding or the witness protection program. I want people to contact me. And I tell them that if they're ever interested in selling their property, call me first. You don't have to call a realtor. Even though I am a realtor, I'm a broker, I own my own brokerage company. You don't have to call a realtor or a broker. If you want to sell your property, I already own property in this neighborhood. I'm your next door neighbor. I like this neighborhood. I want to buy more property in this neighborhood. If you want to sell your property, contact me. I've gotten many properties that way from word of mouth. The other thing about word of mouth, somebody contacted me. They were moving across country with their job. They had to sell their home. The plan was that the husband was going to go to his job in Utah. His wife was going to stay back on the East Coast, and she was going to put the house up for sale, and she was going to stay in the house until the house was sold, and then she was going to move to Utah, take all of their personal belongings and everything, and go to Utah. I said, well, I think I can help you. How about if I buy your house, you and your wife go to Utah together and take all of your stuff with you, so you don't have to come back for settlement. Your wife doesn't have to stay here and buy and have the house listed for sale or show the house and everything else. No, you can clear out and everybody in the family and all of your stuff can go to Utah at the same time. They thought that was a good idea. I bought their house. I asked them, do you have any other property? He said, well, yeah, we have one rental property. It used to be where we lived before we moved here, and now we rent it out. I said, well, you'd be interested in selling that? He said, oh, yeah, sure. He said, I don't want to manage the property from Utah. He gave me 100% seller financing on the rental property. So I didn't have to put any down payment down. There was a tenant already in place. The tenant that was in place stayed for another 7 years. So I didn't have a vacancy the first 7 years that I owned the property. I didn't have to paint it. I didn't have to carpet it. I didn't have any major repairs to the property. And I didn't have to find a tenant. I didn't have 1 day of vacancy in the first 7 years I owned the property, and I bought it with zero down. It was an unlisted property, and the only way I got it was word of mouth and asking them if they had anything else to sell. I bought stuff at public auctions, where people hire an auctioneer to sell the property. Lots of times the person that owned the property is deceased, or the person has gone to a nursing home or a nursing facility, and they're selling the house and they're selling all of the personal possessions at the same time. I go to a lot of those auctions. I bought farms at those kinds of auctions also, and we've done work where we've subdivided the farms into lots. I've bought farms as large as 100 acres. One of the properties that we bought had over a mile of road frontage on existing roads. And we were able to do a subdivision on that without building any new roads or sidewalks or anything. We had no infrastructure costs, and we were able to subdivide it into a whole bunch of lots. I've gotten properties from FSBOs, that's for sale by owners. I've gotten properties from relocation companies. These are national companies that work for corporations who transfer their employees. You might be familiar with Tyco Corporation, used to be called AMP. They have big facilities near where I live. They transferred an employee from that facility to a facility in Tennessee. The company hired a relocation company to handle the sale and the transaction of the property. They typically will fix up the property. It'll be in really good condition. They'll paint it and clean it and everything. I bought a property from a relocation company that was in immaculate condition. Bought property at sheriff's sale, which is mortgage foreclosures. I bought property from neighbors, and I bought property that's in pre-foreclosure. I bought over 800 properties. I buy property, I sell property, I rent property, I hold property, I flip property, I rehab property, and I subdivide and develop property. And I'm a real estate broker, as I mentioned. I do that in my spare time also. And Jim alluded to, in the town where I live, I'm on the planning commission in town. So I get to see all the land development and subdivision plans that come through my town, and I sit on a board of other commissioners, and we review and either approve or recommend any subdivision or development plan that goes on in my town. So I'm on the other side of the table there from doing the actual development. In the last year, I bought and sold 23 properties. They weren't the same properties, so I'm very active. That's not the highest volume year that I've ever had. I was mentioning earlier, I used to have a full-time job that was not in real estate. I don't have that any longer. But when I had a full-time job, one year I bought and sold 74 properties while having a full-time job not in real estate. It was work, but I was able to do it. So if any of you have a job, you're doing this investment part-time, there's no reason that you can't buy property part-time even if you have a full-time job. That's not an excuse, that's not a reason not to do it. I bought 10 properties in one day. I've done that multiple times, not off the internet. And I have 23 years of consistently buying at least 10 properties a year. I'm averaging about one property a month over the last 20 plus years. So I'm very active in buying properties. I buy single family houses, I buy duplexes, I buy townhouses, condominiums, small apartment buildings, scattered vacant lots, farms, and woodland. I also buy waterfront property, mixed-use property, commercial property, landlocked land. Little niche, there's not a lot of buyers on that. Failed perk properties. Those are properties that have failed the perk test and you can't have a septic system on it, which means that they're unbuildable. We've had very good success with that. We've bought floodplain properties, we've bought out-of-state properties, we bought properties with title issues and other problem properties. I got licensed to do the perk test in my state just for the education and how I could relate that to real estate investment. We were able to buy many lots that had failed perk. We were able to go in and re-perk them. I can't re-perk them myself because that would be conflict of interest, but just having the knowledge and the license to know specifically how the test is supposed to be conducted properly and doing it under the most favorable circumstances to its past. We were able to buy some lots for as low as $100. We bought one lot for $1,500 and sold it for $80,000 just by perking it. So there's a big opportunity in niches like that too that we've been able to get into, and there's not a lot of competition in that area. Title issue problems. I used to have my office in an attorney's office, and I wasn't an attorney. I'm not an attorney. I've never been an attorney or an accountant or a CPA or a doctor, so I don't give any kind of advice like that. But I worked in this attorney's office. I basically kind of rented space in the attorney's office for my real estate business. But I became good friends with the attorney that was the head of the office. The office primarily focused on real estate. They did real estate settlements. That was about 90% of their business in this real estate office. They had 5 title abstractors on staff. Typically, you would see the settlement company, they contract out. They don't have enough business to have staff abstractors. This law firm was doing so many settlements. At the peak of the market, they were doing settlements from 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. They had 5 abstractors on staff. I talked to the head of the company. I said, I'd like to learn more about doing title searches. Is it possible that I could tag along with some of your abstractors when they were working at the courthouse searching titles? He said, sure. I went out multiple days with multiple different abstractors that work at the company and just followed them around and asked them a ton of questions. I learned how to do title abstracting. It came in handy in a lot of things that I've done in real estate investing. At one courthouse, this was before 9/11 when security was a lot more open. One of the courthouses where I was doing title searching for my own investment, they would lock the door at 4:30 in the afternoon, but if you were inside the building, you could stay there as long as you wanted. So some nights I was there past midnight searching titles. I was the only one there searching titles. Everybody else had gone home, the staff had gone home. The lights were still on. The only ones in the building were the janitors and the security staff. But I was there searching my own titles so that I didn't have to pay an abstractor to search titles. We did this primarily for tax sales and sheriff's sale properties. The very first property that I bought is pictured on the front cover of my book. It's the red brick ranch house. It's this house right here. I bought that property from the State Highway Department. It was excess property to the Highway Department, They bought some properties. They were expanding a highway. It was a limited access highway. They were going to have an exit ramp, and it was going to empty right into the middle of the subdivision. The people that lived in the subdivision protested this. They got upset about this traffic going into the subdivision, and they got the state to redesign the interchange on the highway so that the interchange skirted the development and went around the perimeter of the development, and the state had already bought some houses, and they ended up with these excess houses they didn't need to tear down for the highway construction project. I was looking for a property. I was telling everybody that I knew that I was looking for property, which is another good thing to always do. Somebody that I worked with said, well, they're having an auction on my street. You might be interested in taking a look at this house. I said, sure. The street was a dead-end street, so there's not a lot of traffic on the street. The state had put up a sign in the front yard, which not a lot of people saw because it's on a dead-end street. They put an advertisement in the newspaper that had the meets and bounds descriptions. You know, that's the notes. Beginning at a point, such and such and such, and having upon their dwelling. There was no description of the house. There was no picture of the house. That was the entire ad. And the one sign. That was the only advertisement they did to sell this property. The state had owned this property for 7 years after they had redesigned the highway. They had rented it for all those 7 years at a below market rent. It took an act of the legislature and a signature of the governor to sell these properties. So I went to the auction. I had never been to an auction before. I'd never bought any real estate before. My parents had only ever bought one house in their entire career. I recognized there was a real estate broker bidding. You had to have 10% of your bid in cash the day of the sale, which is sort of a typical requirement of auctions. I had to borrow 10% from my parents because I had no money. I went to the auction, and it ended up at the end that I was bidding against the broker. It was only the two of us bidding. He'd raise his bid, and I'd raise my bid. I went over my bid limit because that was all the money that I had, and I ended up getting the house. I had to borrow the extra money to satisfy my deposit from a friend of mine who came to the auction just out of curiosity. He didn't know it was going to cost him money. I didn't tell him that, and I didn't even know that until after the bidding concluded and everything. I literally had no money. I didn't have any money in my bank. I didn't have any money in my pocket. I had no more money, and this friend of mine lent me the extra money. I put down the 10% deposit. I signed the contract. We're going to settle in 30 days. I went to a bank, applied for a mortgage. 30 days come. We're getting near the end of the 30 days. I was renting an apartment. I gave notice to the apartment that I'd be moving in 45 days, give me an extra 2 weeks to move, even though I really didn't have anything to move. We're getting near the end of the 30 days, and we haven't settled yet. Remember, this is my very first real estate deal. I didn't know anything about real estate. The sale was being handled by the Attorney General's office. And so I went to the Capitol, and I went to the Attorney General's office, and I talked to the Deputy Attorney General who's handling the sale of this property. And I said, I have a little bit of dilemma. I already given notice at my apartment to move out. They've already re-entered my apartment. You know, I signed the contract that we were going to settle in 30 days. We haven't settled. I need a place to live. Is it possible that I could move into the house before settlement? I said, it's vacant. And he said, well, no, we couldn't possibly do that. He said, we don't have any insurance. What's the state? You know, a lot of times they self-insure. They don't carry insurance policies for things. Sometimes they don't carry insurance policies for state vehicles either, which is a whole nother story that I know about. I said, well, that's not a problem, because I was anticipating, based on our contract, we're going to settle in 30 days. So I already got an insurance policy that's going to be effective within the 30 days. He said, Well, if you show us proof of insurance, we'll give you the keys. I says, okay. I got the binder from the insurance company, took it over to the Attorney General's office, gave them the binder, and they gave me the keys, and I moved in. Throughout that whole discussion, we never discussed rent. I thought we were going to settle in a few days or maybe a week. They never discussed rent. I never brought up. They never brought up. So I moved in. We didn't settle for 6 more months. During that time, they had to pay the sword and the trash because they were still the deeded owner. And they had already contracted, this was during the summer, they had already contracted with a company, a landscaping company, to cut the grass. So I moved into this house. Every week, some company would come and cut my grass for free. The sewer and the trash bills were paid. I had to pay gas, electric, and water. I didn't have to pay any rent or any mortgage payment. And since I thought we were going to be settling anytime soon, I got a roommate to move in and pay me rent. So then we don't settle for 6 months. I'm thinking to myself, this real estate, it's good stuff. And I've been buying real estate ever since, and I've never been able to duplicate this deal. But the point of this is there's other off-market ways to buy property. Cities and counties, governments, highway departments, they have other properties that they have that are excess to their needs. They could be from an expanded road project or a highway project, or it could be that there was some building project that they bought some property for, and then that project didn't go through. No, maybe the funding didn't come through or something else like that. So you should be checking with these kind of off-market sources. The city, the county, state government, even the federal government owns a bunch of property, and typically that property is not listed for sale on the multi-list. That's a picture of the first house that I bought. It's on the cover of the book. It's a brick ranch house. The state had just put a brand new roof on it, like a couple months before I bought it. It's all brick on all 4 sides. It has a hip roof. The windows are Anderson windows. It has hardwood floors. It has ceramic tile baths. It was like the perfect first house for me to buy because it didn't need a whole bunch of work. I didn't have to gut it. I didn't have to do major work to it. I cleaned it and painted it, and that's all it had. I lived in it for a while, and then I rented. I owned it for 24 years. It proved to be a good rental property for me. The next thing I'm going to talk about is HUD properties. The HUD website is hudhomestore.com. If you're not familiar with that website, you should get familiar with that website. The website is open to anybody. You can look at the website anytime, 24/7. It has a list of all the HUD properties that are for sale in the entire country. The first 15-day period is reserved for owner-occupants. If you're looking for an owner-occupied house, this will be one source of looking for that. If you're looking for an investment property, you can still look at the list within that 15-day period, and you could even look at the property within that 15-day period. Even if you're not an owner-occupied, you just can't submit a bid during that time period. If you lie and say that you're an owner-occupant and you're not an owner-occupant, the penalty is up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. And this is a federal offense. It's not something you want to do. On their website, extended means anybody can bid. Exclusive means owner-occupied only. The website is updated daily. They also have some other special programs. One of the programs I've never been able to avail myself of, but I think it's a really neat program, and it's called the Good Neighbor Next Door. If you're police, fire, EMT, or a teacher, you can buy a house off of the HUD website for 50% of asking price. They give you a 50% discount right off their asking price if you fall into one of those categories. So it might not apply to you, but if you have a son or a daughter or a relative who's a fireman or a policeman or a teacher or an EMT, they can buy a property at 50% of what the asking price is. It's a great deal. One of the requirements is you have to live in it owner occupied for 36 months. That should be pretty easy to do. And there's some teacher requirements there. You have to be K through 12. You can't be a college teacher, or you can't teach pastry or something else like that. You have to be a teacher in an elementary or middle or high school. And it could be either a public school or a private school. It's a fantastic program. Registered bidders and agents are the only ones that can actually put in the bid, but it's easy to get registered with HUD. If you are an agent or you work for a broker and they're not registered, you should get them to register. There's no cost to do that. You can bid daily. If you are awarded the property, if you're the high bidder, you have 48 hours to get the written contract to them and the deposit. If you're an investor and you don't settle, you forfeit your deposit. The deposits, though, are really low. They're $500, $1,000, or 1%. Depends on what the price of the property is. If it's less than $50,000, the deposit's $500. Some of the asset managers, if it's over $50,000, it's 1%. Some it's a flat rate of $1,000. So if you were an investor and you didn't settle, you'd forfeit that. The utilities are usually turned off, and you have to be aware of freeze damage to the property in any areas where there's winters. There is a catch on this deposit thing. If you're an owner-occupied, you are eligible to get your deposit back, unlike an investor. But there is another catch in this, another loophole. In that 48-hour period where you have to get the contract to them, if you don't submit your contract, you haven't submitted your deposit, and you can walk away without any repercussions. There's no penalties for being the high bid and then not sending in the contract. And like, they don't blackball you or anything else like that. You can still bid on other properties. So if you bid on the property and in the first 48 hours before you send in your deposit, you have a change of heart, or you find out something else about the property that is a negative that you don't like, you can just default on your bid, and they'll relist it and somebody else can bid on it. This is a HUD property that I bought. On the first floor, it's all stone. It's real stone, limestone. The last sale on this property was $141,000. I paid $52,000 for it, and I have it listed for sale for $149,900. I got it at 70% of what the HUD asking price is. One of the questions people often ask is, how low can you bid on HUD properties? If they're asking prices here, how far below that can you bid? In this example, I bid 70% of what they were asking, so I bid 30% discount off of their asking price. It was on the market for 104 days, so it was on the market for a long time. Typically, when the properties on HUD are on the market for a long time, they have a routine where they lower the price. It can be as much as 10% every 30 days. They don't always do that. Sometimes they wait 60 days before they first do the first price reduction, but they sometimes are slow, and I think it depends on how much inventory they have and how anxious they are to sell it. But they do drop the prices on a routine, and the routine can be as much as 10% every 30 days. This is another property I bought from HUD. The previous sale was $108,000. I paid $36,000. I have that rented for $895. It's only the yellow half. It's a semi-detached house. It has 3 bedrooms, has a bath and a half, has hardwood floors, has gas heat, and has central air conditioning. Had all that stuff before I bought it. I got it at 85% of the asking price. It was only on the market 15 days. And so since the first 15 days are for owner occupied, I got this like the minute it was available for an investor. So that's how I got it at 15 days. And that's also why my percentage of asking price is so high, because I was bidding on it at the beginning of the bid process.
One question.
Yes, sir.
What's the last sale? Is it like the last sale of that property? Or?
Last sale of that property, before it was foreclosed on, was 108. So that's what somebody thought the value was, and that's what FHA appraised it at for the person that lost it in foreclosure. Prices change, that was probably a peak market price, but it kind of gives you an indication. I wouldn't say that it's worth 108 today, but I think it's worth a lot more than 36. There's a big spread between 36 and 108.
Are all these HUD homes foreclosed? Is that why they're on?
That's how they get to be HUD homes. The person bought it with an FHA mortgage. FHA mortgages have to be owner occupied, and FHA is a part of HUD. They will finance up to 4 units, but one of the units would have to be owner occupied initially, and you only have to owner occupied for the first year. So if you're buying a property and moving into it and you get an FHA mortgage, there typically would be fixed for 30 years. You live there for 1 year, you move out and rent it for the next 29 years. The mortgage interest stays the same. This is another house that I bought. This sold for $199,900. I bought it for $119,000. I have it rented for $1,300. I bought it at 71% of asking price, and it was on the market for 30 days. It's a nicer house, bigger house. It has a garage, has central air conditioning, 3 bedrooms, bath and a half. This is another house I bought. It's a HUD property. It had previously sold for $70,000. I bought it for $38,000. We did some minor work on it. We cleaned the carpeting, we painted it. We sold it for $60,000 to somebody that was going to rent it out. My bid was $60,000. Was 60% of what their asking price was, and it was on the market for 101 days. So the longer they're on the market, the more flexibility you have on your bid price.
Do you have to own the HUD home for a certain amount of time, buying as an investor?
No, you do not. There's not seasoning on HUD homes like there are on Fannies or Freddies. I think I have another one in here that I've only owned for 9 days. Well, I think we'll get to that. I think that's in the presentation. This is another house I bought. This is a newer property. I think this was only built in '98. 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. It sold previously for $136,000. I paid $78,000. We cleaned it and painted it. Did no other work. Sold it for $124,900. My bid was 70% of their asking price. Has been on the market for 54 days. Another property. This had previously sold for $120,000. I paid $62,000. Resold it for $108,900. I bought it at 68% of asking price. It was on the market for 84 days. This property, this one I keep for a rental, it sold for $146,000. I paid $50,000. Have it rented for $11.95. I bought it for 70% of asking price, and it was on the market for 169 days. So the longer they're on the market, the more flexibility you have on the purchase price. And you can see how many days it's been on the market on their website. So that information's all there. It's all public information. You don't need to go anywhere else. You can look at this website 24/7. Another house that I bought, this sold previously for $113,000. I bought it for $41,000. I have it rented for $820,000. I bought it at 70% of asking price. It was only on the market 8 days. The reason that it was only on 8 days and I was able to buy it as an investor is that it had been on the market before, and an owner-occupant had bid on it and been awarded the property but failed to close. At that time, the investors had to wait 30 days before they bid. So that house had been on the market for 22 days previously. Somebody bid on it, was awarded as an owner-occupant. It fell through. So those 22 days were subtracted from the 30, so it only had to be on the market 8 days before an investor could buy it. I bought it on the first day that it was available for an investor. Yes, ma'am.
And when you bid, how quickly do they let you know whether or not it's actually accepted?
Well, they're not open Saturdays and Sundays, and you can bid on Saturday and Sunday because the website's open 24/7. So they're only open Monday through Friday, and they have all federal holidays off. Typically, you'll know within 24 hours. And you can bid, if you don't get it, you can bid the next day at a different price. You can bid every day if you want on the same property.
And these are on MLS at the same time?
Typically, they would be on MLS. It used to be that HUD properties weren't on the MLS, but now they are.
There's a lot of bank-owned ones on the MLS, you know.
Take forever to get.
So the HUD's entirely different from all that.
This is totally different from Fannie's or Freddie's or things that are owned by banks. These responses are much quicker. These are not short sales, so you're not lower asking something lower than what the bank's willing to go. And the way that they determine the prices, a lot of people have the misconception that the price is determined by what the former owner owed. What the former owner owed, like in this case, the former owner bought it for $113. By the time it was foreclosed, they probably owed $120. That has nothing to do with the asking price on the HUD website. They have an appraiser go out and look at the property, and the appraiser looks at the property in its as-is condition to determine what the value is. So I think they had this listed at 59 or something like that. That's what the appraiser said it was worth, even though HUD had 120 in it. So right off the bat, HUD's taken a $60,000 loss on this, and I encourage them to take another $20,000 loss.
Are you personally inspecting the insides, or are you going off the inspector's report?
That's a good point. There is an inspection report that's also on the website. It's one of the addendums on there. It's called Property Condition Report. Sometimes they abbreviate it as PCR. I look at those, but I physically go out and look at every property that I bid. And the way that I do that is I'm looking only for specific properties, and I'll go out and look at them during the owner-occupied period, even though I can't bid on it during that period, so that I've already looked at it and I'm ready to jump on it. In this case, the first day that it became available for an investor. So that day I didn't have to go look at it, but I looked at it like the week before.
Do you have someone that's dedicated to look at this site every day for you?
No, I do it myself. I have no employees. I do all this myself. I bought 800 properties. I have no employees. I don't have somebody to answer my phone. I don't have a virtual assistant. I don't have a bookkeeper. I don't have an assistant of any kind.
Why not?
Where's Quincy at? Is Quincy still here? I don't like employees. And if you don't have employees, you qualify for a solo 401k, which you can ask Quincy about. It's a great vehicle for building retirement funds. The income level, the amount of money that you can put into a solo 401k, and it can be a Roth, is much higher than the limits that you can put into an IRA.
So all these HUD homes you buy are in your local area, or you do out of?
Almost always they're in my local area, but I think Quincy mentioned about the crews going out of Puerto Rico. You can look on the website. Puerto Rico is part of the United States, you know. They do have HUD foreclosures in Puerto Rico, and I think the last time I looked, they had like 120 HUD properties in Puerto Rico. So you could buy a house in Puerto Rico, and it could be a vacation home, you could rent it out or whatever. Also, Virgin Islands is part of the U.S., and Guam and some other places. Hawaii. I saw there was one house in Hawaii that was a HUD property. And I've been looking for a house in the Virgin Islands. I love the Virgin Islands. We've been to St. Thomas and St. John. I've never seen a listing for Virgin Islands. Apparently those people who have Virgin Island properties, have FHA mortgages, are up to date on their mortgage payments.
They don't want to lose it.
That's correct. Yes, sir.
How do you typically finance these houses?
When I first started, I really didn't have any money. No, that's not just a catchphrase. The first 11 properties that I bought 100% financed, one way or another. A couple of properties I had a partner, I borrowed some money from my parents. I bought a property, FHA. I wanted the property, and I wasn't looking for an owner-occupied house, but it was such a nice house, I had to buy it. I bought it FHA, which means I had to move into it. So I did that. If you're familiar with the term house hacking, that's house hacking, where you move into an investment property and then later convert it to an investment property. So I've done a bunch of things like that. Since then, today, like on these properties here, I'm typically paying cash. I'm not financing them. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about your speed or the amount of time it took you to scale the business, especially working as an individual, not having any employees working for you?
Well, I mentioned that I'm typically buying a house a month.
Right, but how long did it take you to get to, like when you started, you got to 11 properties that were financed for other people, how long did it take you to get to 11 and then move into like where you get to 800?
A number of years, I'm not exactly sure. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't buy 11 properties the first year. I had a really low-paying job when I first started, and I didn't have any savings, and so I went kind of slow. It took me a number of years to get to the point where I was buying, a property a month. And a property a month isn't as big as some other people. I was talking to the head of a turnkey company. You familiar with what a turnkey company is? They buy properties, they fix them up, and then they sell them to either investors or homeowners, and they're all fixed up. I'm sure there must be turnkey companies in Richmond, right, Jim?
There are some, yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them in like Memphis, Tennessee for some reason.
The owner of the turnkey company I talked to, and they buy 30 properties a month. I'm buying one property a month. They're buying 30 properties a month. They fix them up and they sell them typically at retail prices to investors, and they provide property management, all that sort of thing. They buy 50% of their properties off the multi-list in order to get the volume that they're doing. So I'm buying a lot less off the multi-list than they are, and I'm using a lot of different other sources. A lot of those sources take some time, but they're niches that there's not a lot of other people competing in. And I use like 20 different niches. And I feel that having a bunch of different ways of buying a property enable me to buy property no matter what the market conditions are. Now, if you specialize in short sale and then short sales dry up, then what do? That's the only thing you know how to do. So I think that you need to have a whole bunch of acquisition methods in your tool belt. And I like the phrase, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if all you have is a hammer, you're going to try to find a deal that fits into only the little niche that you own, that you're working in. But if you have a whole bunch of different niches, then you can do a bunch of different things, and you can talk to a bunch of different people, and depending on what their circumstances are or what the sale of the property circumstances are, you're able to have a method that works with that. You don't have to try to pigeonhole them into the only method you know how to do.
What is your preference, to resell it or to rent it?
I like buy and hold. This is the property that I only owned for 9 days. This is a HUD property. It had previously sold for $150,000. I bought it for $51,000. It had been on the market for 97 days. That's over 3 months. And they had it listed, I think, at $89,900. I got it at 56% of asking price. That's one of the questions people will always ask you, well, how low can you bid? I've gotten a property as low as 56% of asking price. So if somebody tells you 90, or I've heard 88 or 84, my experience has been different. No.
Start that low typically, and work your way up, or?
Well, you don't start high and go down.
Right.
It depends on the property. It depends on how long it's been on the market. These are properties that are in areas where I'm very familiar with because I've been working there for a number of years. I know what the values are, and this is a big house and it's an old house, but it's a big house and has lots of nice features, but it also had some negative features to it too, being an older house. I wholesaled it for $61,000. I didn't do a thing to it. I didn't clean anything out of it. I didn't throw anything away. I didn't paint it. I did nothing to the property. I owned it for 9 days, and I sold it to a rehabber for $61,000. And the only reason I owned it for 9 days is HUD doesn't let you have assigns on the contract, so I had to take title to the property. But I did nothing to it. I had the buyer lined up before I actually settled on it. So we had 2 settlements within 9 days. I bought it for $51,000, I sold it for $61,000. He went in and rehabbed it, and then he listed it with me for sale, and we sold it for $121,000. So I had 3 settlements on this property within 2 months. So that worked out really well too. So the rehabber made money, I made some money, and I sold a property 3 times in 2 months.
What areas do you target and what areas do you stay out of, since you know the area well?
I'm not in Virginia. I'm from Pennsylvania.
Right, in Pennsylvania, like what areas do you specifically?
I like typically suburban areas and rural areas. I'm not in the inner cities. But I'm not afraid of older properties. That stone house that I bought was 100 years old. I'm not afraid of older properties. That was a niche that I like. Somebody had bought that property in 2009 and did an extensive renovation on it. They put in new windows, new siding, new roof, 2 new bathrooms, a new kitchen, and a heat pump with central air. And they sold it. The person that bought it paid $141,000. They only lived in it about a year. They defaulted on their mortgage and it went back to HUD. And that's the one that I bought for $51,000. Most of the work was already done. It already had all those new things. So one of the types of properties that I look for is properties that were rehabbed, say, within the last 10 years. I like those kind of properties because a bunch of the work's already done for me. So I don't have to go in and put new windows and roof and siding and bathrooms and kitchens. I did nothing to any of those items on this house. So it put me way ahead of the game on fixing up to reselling it. I also like, another niche I like in HUD properties is properties that are only 10 or 15 years old. Most of the properties I'm buying are much older than that. There's not as big a supply of those kind of properties on the HUD list, but I typically look specifically for a property that was built in 2008 that's on the HUD list. Well, it's been built to code. It probably has central air. It probably has multiple bathrooms. It's a nice house and it's built to today's standards. And somebody might have lived in it for 3 or 4 years and then defaulted. How bad can it be? It would typically be in generally good condition. But again, I'm going out there and I'm taking a look, make sure that the people didn't take the kitchen and the bathroom and the furnace and everything with them when they left.
Been there, done that?
Yeah, that's happened. So you have to be careful about that. This house was a big house. It was over 2,000 square feet. It had hardwood floors, had a fireplace. There were a couple negatives to this house. One was it had oil heat, which is a big negative in my area. I prefer natural gas or a heat pump, natural gas being way up at the top of my list. And so it didn't have central air either. The rehabber that bought it converted to gas. There was a gas line in the street. You can't see it in this picture, but the house to the right already had a gas meter on the outside, so you could see that there was gas there. I mean, you didn't even have to get out of the car to know the gas was available. He called the gas company. The gas company put in a gas line for free to the house. He had to pay for the rest of it. He put in a new gas furnace. And that was one of the things that sold the house too, that it had gas heat. rather than oil heat. I think maybe that might have contributed to why it was on the HUD list for so long. Didn't have central air, it had oil heat. I didn't change any of those things. I sold it to somebody else's problem. It was easy fix for me because I didn't do anything. I didn't fix it. How can you learn from my experience? Well, there's one way. I want to thank the people that already bought my book. Anna Marie bought my book. Daddy bought my book. Some other people bought my book. I was here yesterday and spoke to the RIA group. There's a lot of examples in the book, a lot of different ways to buy real estate. I have 20 different acquisition methods. There's 134 chapters in the book. I have lessons learned in every chapter. There's 473 lessons learned, 274 properties, 342 pages, it's $40. I have it available here today. Or you can also buy my book at my website. It's $12millionbook.com. And we have free shipping. So the price is the same whether you buy it today or you buy it off the website. There's no extra charge for shipping. And we don't charge sales tax unless you have a Pennsylvania address. Do I have more time?
Sure.
We're going to talk tomorrow about tax sales. I'm going to be speaking, I think, at 1. I'm going to skip this. I'm going to skip that too. These are some properties I bought at tax sale. We're going to go over that tomorrow. Different things that you can do. Here's some of the things that I've been involved with deals. Squabbling heirs. I mentioned this yesterday when I was speaking. I bought a property. The owner had passed away. There were 6 heirs. All 6 of the heirs hated each other. There weren't 2 heirs that even liked each other. They wouldn't sign the same deed as somebody else who they were related to. I had to get 6 quitclaim deeds from 6 different people in order to clear the title on that property. I've gone after failed perk tests, as I mentioned before. I've bought properties that were condemned. I want to know why they were condemned before I bought them, of course. There's different gradations of condemnation. I bought a property that had a sump pump, and people didn't pay their mortgage, and the electric, of course, was turned off, and water was in the basement, and the sump pump wasn't running because no electricity. The basement was finished. It had a family room, it had a bathroom, and it had a bedroom. When I got the property, there was 2 feet of water in the basement. And the zoning officer, I called the zoning officer before to find out what the condemnation was. He said he had been in the property, that it had been left unlocked, and that there was 8 feet of water in the basement. But I never saw evidence of that. We ripped out everything in the basement, all the rooms, and threw all that stuff away. There was like a ring around the concrete block wall, 2 feet high, like a bathtub ring, around the whole basement. And the furnace and the hot water heater had been under 2 feet of water. We were able to get both of them running. I was like shocked. I think it was underwater for 2 years. Wow. And we were able to get the furnace and the hot water heater to run without replacing them. The sump pump, as soon as I had the electric turned on, the sump pump kicked in, of course. Well, it didn't shut off because there was 2 feet of water in there. Well, it just ran and ran and ran until it burned itself out, and all the water wasn't out of the basement. I had to call a plumber to come and wade into the basement and put in a new sump pump so we could get the rest of the water out of the basement. That's all I did to that property. I sold it to a contractor who was looking for winter work. There was a lot of mold in this house too. And he bought it, and he did a bunch of work to it, and he flipped it. So he made out, I made some money. I didn't make a whole lot of money, but I made a little bit of money. And I'm willing to make a little money and sell it to somebody else who's going to do the majority of the work. I think that's all I have on there. Anybody have any questions?
We get rid of the dialogue on the screen.
Beth?
Did you go out on an inspection of the property during that first 15 days? I'm assuming your realtor can get you inside.
Well, I am a realtor.
Oh, so you don't even have to schedule.
I am a realtor. I don't have to schedule it on the HUD properties. And there's 5 HUD keys that open up every HUD property in the country.
Are you going to any in Richmond?
I'm not going to any in Richmond. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do you have any concerns about titles of the properties as a part of that?
I don't have concerns about the title on the property. HUD does a title search before they sell the property, and I get title insurance when I buy the property, and they do a title search. We've had a couple minor little glitches. One property, there was like a water bill that was billed from the municipality that was unpaid. Some things like that, but HUD took care of it. So it goes through the process. It goes through a sheriff's sale. They do title searches for sheriff's sales. Then it goes to the bank. Then it goes to HUD. Before HUD sells it, they do a title search. When I buy it, my title company does a title search and issues title insurance, so I don't have any worries about titles.
Is it a general warranty deed that you get with it, or?
Typical in Pennsylvania, they issue special warranty deeds. Yeah. So you do get a warranty deed. It's not a quitclaim deed.
Quitclaim deed, is there any concerns with those?
Well, you don't get them on these kind of things. And most of the time, I don't like quitclaim deeds because there is no warranty and there could be something hidden. It could be that the seller is not telling you the full story, or it could be that the seller doesn't know the full story. So I would typically not buy a property if I was only getting a quitclaim deed. But there might be an exception. Yes, ma'am.
For your buy and hold properties, do you manage them yourself and also the tenant? Or because you said you don't like employees?
I don't have any employees. Most of the properties I manage myself. I do have some properties that I have a property management company that manages them. They charge me 7%. They get the tenants. They screen the tenants. They do the credit checks. They rent them up. They collect the rent. They answer the tenants' calls for complaints. On those properties, I've never seen the tenants or had any conversations with them. I have no contact with the tenants, and that's fine with me. I do manage property that I own that's not in Pennsylvania. So it's kind of ironic because I have property in Pennsylvania that I have property management for, but I have property not in Pennsylvania that I manage myself. And I have property in Pennsylvania that I manage myself too.
Are those places where you typically go to vacation, or?
I bought property. I bought a VA foreclosure that was near the beach that I bought primarily for my own use, and I bought some other properties like that. And I wouldn't mind buying some other properties. I like warm weather. I like Florida. I went to Florida for 2 weeks in January, and it was very nice compared to Pennsylvania. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that you have 20 unique niches. What are your top 5 to 7 over the last year you've used to find property?
HUD, tax sales, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, sheriff sales, which are mortgage foreclosures. Tax sales are tax delinquencies. And I do buy stuff out of the multi-list. And I do buy stuff that's for sale by owner that's not listed.
I have a quick question. You may have covered this, but I noticed that a lot of your the HUDs that you turned around, and it was a very, very short period of time. So is there no seasoning with HUDs?
There is no seasoning with HUDs. Unlike Fannie and Freddie, there's no seasoning for HUDs like the one I sold in 9 days. HUD could care less.
Penalty, no.
And they don't care what you sell it for. Like on some of the Fannies, you can only sell it for 15 or 20% more than you paid for. So HUD doesn't care. So you can sell it the next day, you can sell it the same day, and you could sell it for twice what you paid for it.
You can't assign it, though. You have to.
You cannot assign it. You have to settle on it.
unbuildable lot?
The ones that are unbuildable will typically be ones that have failed the perk test. And we go in and we re-perk them. We went into one area where they were only passing a third of the perk test. 2/3 of the tests were being failed. Some of that was a problem with the person who was doing the test, but not all of it was that. This was in an area where there was a lot of vacant lots, and the corners weren't marked clearly on the lots. No, there was just vegetation. And to ensure that you're doing the perk test on the lot, he would tend to do the perk test in the middle of the lot. And if it was all overgrown with brush and everything, he would typically do it in the front, in the middle of the lot, and that would be the only place that he would test. And if it would fail, he wouldn't go to the rest of the lot, or he wouldn't skirt to the sides or anything, because he didn't know exactly where the boundaries were. So some of that responsibility was on the lot owners who didn't have the property properly marked that you could move to different areas. We would typically like to do the perk test in the back of the lot. These lots are going to need wells too, and the well would go in the front of the lot, because it's hard to get the well drilling rig to the back of the lot if you have the perk in the front of the lot. So right away, that doesn't work for us for aesthetic reasons, and it also doesn't work for us for getting a well drilling rig into the property.
Have you installed an alternatives up to it?
We don't install the systems. No, we just get them approved for certain systems, and we have, we have done 4 or 5 different types of systems. The more alternate or experimental the system is, typically the more it costs. So you have to factor that into the price of the lot. If the lot's a higher price lot, you can afford to get into a more expensive system. But if it's not a high price lot, you have to try to stick as close to standard systems because of the cost factor.
What about the land, lot land? What do you do with them?
We resell them. Besides perking them, some of the other things that we've done is we've sold them to adjoiners, the people that live next door, so that they'd have a bigger yard or some other reason. So that's another way that I sell them off market, is sell them to somebody who already owns property next to them.
David, I like this idea. I'm curious, how many of the lots that you buy do you never get to they never perk?
In that one area where 2/3 of the lots were failing perk, we went in and we bought over 100 properties. We had a 99% pass rate. But that's a little bit deceptive, because lots that were lost causes that I looked at that were lost causes, we didn't buy. So we eliminated those right off the top. And lost cause lots, to me, would be wetlands. You can't disturb the wetlands. Streams, floodplains, steep slopes. If the lot's like this, you're not going to be able to get a septic system onto the lot. No, it's too steep. Or if it's too rocky, or if it's in a flood zone or wetlands. We've done drip, but there's limitations too on slope. In Pennsylvania, in Pennsylvania there's limitations on slope. Sand mounds can only go up to 12% with a regular sand mound, 15% with a experimental, and in-grounds can only go up to 25% slope. We've had lots that we've looked at that had 48% slope. That's unbuildable. And since there was so much quantity there, and the prices were middle prices, they weren't real high priced lots, we excluded the ones that were hardest cases and went for the low hanging fruit. So that's how we bought lots as low as $100 and resold them. Had them perked and resold them. And we've also sold lots to adjoiners. That's another easy way to do things. Yes, sir.
How do you find lots that don't?
We did a lot of work in one municipality. They had records of all the lots and whether they passed or they failed. And I sent letters to the lot owners. And I do a lot of letter solicitation. I typically target out-of-state owners, out-of-county owners, non-owner occupieds, people who have owned the property a long time. If somebody's owned the property 30 years, there's probably no debt on it. And typically, I like lots and land because most of the lots and land don't have any mortgages on them either. So that's another factor in my decisions.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I was looking at a property with, it was sold, I'm sorry, it was foreclosed on by Bank of America, and then Secretary of Veteran something, maybe Affairs or something. owns it.
Yeah, those are VAs.
Yeah, and they want to do a quick claim deed. So what is the like repercussions on trying to pursue a property like that?
I don't like quitclaim deeds, as I mentioned already. I'd want to make sure that there's no title issue there, there's no problem that they're covering up with a quitclaim deed. You can, the title company that you're going to use to settle, they can do a preliminary title search and they can tell you if there's a problem with the title or not. We've done stuff where we bought property that had title problems and we've rectified the problems, but that's not something to do as your first property or something as a beginning investment. No, you need to have more knowledge to cure title defects. There's a lot to it.
You mentioned earlier about VA foreclosures.
Yes.
Are those, what's the difference between those? Like, I'm assuming you're talking about Veterans Affairs?
Yes, Veterans Affairs also sells property. No, they're another agency of the federal government. And the Department of Agriculture also sells properties that they've foreclosed on. USDA, they sell property that are typically in rural areas and they have foreclosed properties also. The VA doesn't have a website and doesn't operate the same way as HUD. Their current procedure is they typically list them with real estate agents and they sell them. There was a time when VA would also finance them. They're not doing that anymore. There are some HUDs that you can get HUD financing for. You have to be an owner occupied to get HUD financing. But you can tell on the HUD website they have a category on there for insured and uninsured. Insured means you can get an FHA mortgage. But one of the requirements of getting the FHA mortgage, you have to be owner occupied. The FHA is only for owner occupied, so you can't buy it as an investment. You have to live there, even if it's 1 to 4 units, you still have to live there for like a year.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Why and when did you decide to get your real estate license?
I got my real estate license early on, and I wasn't really doing much with it as a agent. Before I bought my first property, the property manager who managed the rental property that I lived in as a tenant was a broker, and he had his office next door. So I became friends with him, and he said, "Why don't you get your license?" And I didn't really know anything about it. You only had to take 2 courses. It's like the equivalent of like 4 college credits, and you have to pass the state exam. It's like real easy to do, so I just did it. Later on, I got a broker's license. I opened up my own office because just like I don't like employees, I don't like employers either. So I'm an equal opportunity discriminator. I don't like working for anybody else, and I don't like people working for me. So I set up my own office about 20 years ago. I became a broker, and I set up my own office. And one of the things that when I was an associate broker when I worked at my last other office that I didn't own, and we had 30 agents in the office where I worked at, where I was an employee. Well, I wasn't an employee, we're independent contractors. But I was an associate broker at a company I didn't own. There were 30 agents in the office. I did more business than all the other 30 agents combined. So, and it was a family-run business, and I wasn't in that family. And every year, you know, I would suggest to the owner that I get a bigger cut of compensation because I was such a big part of the business. And in the real estate business, I have a feeling that listings are what drives the business. You know, that's what makes the phone ring. You know, you have to have listings. If you have no listings, you're not going to get phone calls. You're not going to get people inquiring about property, and they don't necessarily have to buy your listings, but just making the contact, and you know, they can buy other properties. So I thought that I should get additional compensation because I had so many listings. Well, he didn't exactly see that way, so I decided to open up my own office. And so now, instead of giving away, in some cases I was giving away 50% of my commissions. Well, now I don't give away 50% of my commission. I get 100% of the commission, and I'm not franchised, so I don't have to pay a franchise fee either. So I like that. I like being independent. I like working on my own. I don't like working for other people. I don't like people working for me. I'm not a babysitter. That's one of the things I'm not doing. I'm not babysitting other employees.
I have a quick question for you. I'm really intrigued by the condemned properties, so I'm not sure what the process is.
Typically in the municipality, or it could be handled at the municipality level, or sometimes it's handled at the county level, depending on your area. A couple weeks ago, I just called the zoning officer in a municipality that I'm familiar with, and I said, do you have any condemned properties? He said, yeah. I said, can I get a list? He said, yeah, you have to come by the office. You had to fill out a Freedom of Information form, which I thought was kind of silly, but I filled it out, and they had like 4 condemned properties and gave me the list. They're not listed properties. They're vacant properties. There's some code violation that the municipality determines that that property can't be inhabited until the corrections are made. One of the properties, for example, I went and looked at, it had a big blue tarp on the roof. Guess what the problem was? It needed a brand new roof, and it had been leaking for such a long time that it had even caused some structural damage. So it was a major work. You know, you had to do. No, it wasn't just shingling. You had to put in new sheathing.
So if the owner of the home doesn't bring that house back up to code, the municipality takes possession?
It depends. In some areas they can do that. In this municipality they don't do that. You'd have to like go to a real extreme. Like it would take maybe 5 or 6 years before it would get to that stage. But this property is not being inhabited. This property happened to be a rental property for the owners. There's an opportunity to contact somebody. No, they have this property, it has a bad roof, they can't rent it, it's on the condemned list. You know, make them an offer. Take a contractor by, see what the contractor's price is to repair it, to get it back into rentable shape, and see if you can work out a deal privately with the seller to buy the property. It's not a listed property.
So those kind of properties, you cannot go in and check them, right? You cannot put them in.
Not typically. You know, if they're not listed, you have to get the owner's permission. But you know, you contact the owner and say, you know, I might be interested in buying your property. Can I meet you there and take a look inside? And maybe bring my contractor. No, you can see from the outside it has this big blue tarp on the roof. You know there's going to be at least a roof problem. You know, there could be a bunch of other problems too. I've bought some condemned properties where I thought that it wasn't going to take much to bring them back. The one that had the water in the basement, and there was some mold issues with it, were really why the property was condemned. They wouldn't let somebody live in a house that had water in the basement. No, so it wasn't that big of a deal to correct. It wasn't structural damage. It's an indoor pool. This house had an outdoor pool too. But that was another thing. The liner of the pool had broken and all the water had drained out. And so at the bottom of the swimming pool, it was like a wetlands. There were cat of 9 tails. And I saw a turtle and a snake. So it was like a man-made wetlands inside this plastic liner.
Assume it was above ground.
No, this was an in-ground pool with a vinyl liner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We ended up getting rid of that. Any other questions? No questions. I can't believe that. Yes, sir.
Could you give us a little bit of information about the 203K?
Yes.
Any information on that?
Yes. There's an FHA program, it's called 203K. It's for rehab loans. I've never gotten one of those loans. I sold a property that somebody had stolen the copper from. So it obviously wouldn't meet FHA standards because it had missing copper. I suggested to the buyers that they do FHA 203K, which would provide money to do the repairs to bring it up to FHA standards. But one of the catches on that is you have to have a licensed contractor do the work. You can't do the work yourself. So you have to have a licensed contractor. They have to provide a bid on letterhead. So it can't be some guy that writes a note on the pad saying what he's doing that. It has to be somebody who's a real contractor. In our state, contractors have to be state licensed. And then they give them draws for the work. So they give them part of the payment, and then it has to be inspected, and then they give them more of the payment, all that. These people that I sold this house to decided they really wanted to do the work themselves because they could do it a lot cheaper. Instead of doing 203K, I was the owner of the property. Instead of doing 203K, I let them get into the property, it was already vacant, obviously, and do the repair work themselves before settlement. Then we just did a regular FHA mortgage, and it passed because the plumbing was all replaced then. And they did it at a much lower cost, and they did the work themselves. So there's some pluses and minuses to 203K. The key minus is you can't do the work yourself. You have to have a contractor, and it has to be a real contractor, not your brother-in-law or somebody like that. And they have to provide an estimate in writing on letterhead.
You have to be an owner-occupied for that?
Yes, all FHA is owner-occupied.
All right, give you a break. Oh, you're good? All right, good morning, huh? You guys are thinking a lot, exercising your brain?